Well, I think that the monotheistic religions are discovering more that they have in common. I mean, belief in one creator God, belief in resurrection, life after death with God. And so in the face of a great tide of secularism, I think the monotheistic faiths will probably feel that they can come together to give one another support, and that would be quite good. The greatest obstacle, of course, is actually fundamentalism, and by that I mean specifically the idea that one scripture tells infallibly, in a literal way, the whole truth, and that other people's scriptures are wrong, just like that, so that there's only one way to truth and to salvation or to life with God, and the other ways are not acceptable. I think that's a danger. It's very untraditional. Islam traditionally talks about the people of the book, and Jews have no problem with saying that other people can have their own gods. And Christians too should believe, because it's in the New Testament, that God desires everyone to be saved, so presumably God is doing something with Muslims and Jews. So I think there's nothing to be said religiously for that view, that there's only one religion which will get you to God. But that's a danger. It's associated with fear, with increasing violence in the world, and people feeling that they need security, I think. So that's the danger. But there's a great hope as well, and one of those hopes is perhaps a change in the sciences, the revolution in science, where the old forms of mechanistic clockwork universe views are receding, and there's a more spiritual view. So the hopeful thing is to see a spiritual view, that the heart of reality is spiritual, without having to feel there's only one path which could possibly get you there. I think the most important change in modern science since 1900, 1925, is quantum mechanics, really, and the view that we now live, as many philosophically minded scientists think, in an open and emergent and holistic universe. So it's not a closed, deterministic causal system. It's a universe which is more organic, which moves towards some goal, some purpose even, of great value, which involves consciousness and freedom and friendship and creativity. And so the universe seems to move towards states of complexity and value. And I think, although not all physicists or scientists would agree with this, it is a view which is entirely compatible with quantum mechanics and with new discoveries in biology too. So I think it's a much more liberating view than the old clockwork universe picture. I think that one problem with the science and religion field is that many people who have been trained in the humanities are afraid of science because it uses mathematics and equations, and it looks very difficult. Indeed, it is quite difficult at times. So there is a slight fear and a reserve about talking about science when you don't really, when you're not a scientist and when you're afraid of making mistakes. So I understand that. So that's why religion and science hasn't formed a particular field except for specialists. But what I think is that traditional thought, religious thought in all the monotheistic religions has always depended upon a presupposed philosophy. It used to be Plato, Aristotle, perhaps Hegel in the case of German Protestant Christian theology. There's always been a philosophical background. Well, today, I believe in our world, there is no agreed philosophy, and the nearest I think it's rather a cultural tragedy of our world that some scientists have come to think that materialism is part of science or is even presupposed by science, and they don't understand the humanities as ways of knowing or as things which add value and meaning to the world. And religion falls between the sciences and the humanities, really, as something which tries to tell the truth about the world, but also has a very, I wouldn't say emotional, but a very intuitive feel for how the universe is. And so there is a breakdown in culture generally between the humanities and the sciences. And religion, standing in the middle, is a casualty of that often. And so you get materialists, and they often rely on a rather old-fashioned view of science to support that. And then you get people who are also afraid of science, and so they go back to a very literalist interpretation of the scriptures. I believe those movements won't last very long because they're both so obviously wrong, and that actually religion and science are both concerned with what is the truth about the nature of what ultimately exists, what is really real. And I think quantum physics says pretty clearly, whatever it is that's really real, it's not this world of appearances and sense appearances which we see. It's something very intelligible, very beautiful, very elegant, maybe even spiritual. I've had lots of meetings with Muslims, of course, many times, but we've always talked about mostly ethical issues or issues of common concern. We tend to avoid tricky theological issues. Well, I think to get a long way in friendship and dialogue, you really need to get to the really difficult issues. But doing it through science is a very interesting way of doing it, because the issues are raised about the nature of ultimate reality, but in a way which has some common ground to start with, so you don't immediately get into arguments. So I think arguments, are good. My whole life as a philosopher consists in arguing. The secret is to learn to argue in friendship. And I think this meeting is succeeding in establishing that you can argue and differ as friends because you have one overwhelming thing in common. We do in this conference, and that is the search for truth and the love of God.